Early Colonization of America. Pod, Canute the Great lives till 1050. During additional 15 years of life, the peace that reigns across his North Sea empire allows for more trade and settlement. It is during this time that larger amounts of settlers move west and settle in Iceland, Greenland, Newfoundland, and Vinland, Nova Scotia. There are 5,000 by 1,066. Chapter 1. The Great Tide of Change. Prologue. The year was 1027, and the North Sea Empire was at its zenith under the rule of Canute the Great. His influence stretched across the seas, from the icy shores of Norway to the bustling ports of England. With his firm hand guiding the empire, peace and prosperity flourished, fostering trade routes that connected distant lands and encouraged the movement of people. However, Canute's ambition did not rest solely on the lands of Europe. His gaze turned westward, toward the uncharted territories beyond the sea, where whispers of new lands, rich and fertile, began to spread among the Norse traders and explorers. The tide of history shifted in the winter of 1035. As the North Sea gales howled through the fjords of Norway, Canute, now an older but still formidable man, found himself drawn to the idea of expansion beyond the known world. Reports from his most trusted explorers spoke of lands that stretched beyond the horizon, lands that offered not only wealth but the possibility of new beginnings. These lands were not entirely unknown to the Norse, but under Canute's rule, they would become more than mere legends. They would become the next frontier. By 1040, a significant effort was underway to organize expeditions westward. Canute, ever the strategist, understood that securing these new territories required more than just brave explorers. It required settlers, people willing to build, farm, and live in these distant lands. The promise of fertile soil and abundant resources drew families from all corners of his empire. The dream of Vinland, a place where the Norse could thrive without fear of raids or the harshness of northern winters, began to take hold. The first settlers. In the spring of 1043, the first fleet of settlers departed from the bustling port of Bergen. It was a sight to behold. A flotilla of sturdy longships, laden with livestock, tools, and the hopes of over 1,000 souls. These were not just warriors and adventurers, they were farmers, craftsmen, women, and children, all seeking a new life across the sea. They sailed under the protection of Canute's navy, the dragon-headed ships a symbol of their empire's strength. Their destination was Vinland, a land first touched by Leif Erikson nearly 50 years prior. The settlers knew the journey would be perilous, but they were undeterred. They carried with them the knowledge of their ancestors, the skills needed to tame the wild, and a deep belief in their gods, who they believed would guide them to their new home. Arrival in the New World. After months at sea, the settlers sighted the shores of Vinland. The land was as beautiful as the sagas had described, endless forests, rivers teeming with fish, and fertile plains waiting to be tilled. They disembarked with a sense of awe and purpose, knowing that they were the vanguard of a new era. Under the leadership of Erik Thorfinnsson, a seasoned explorer and loyal follower of Canute, the settlers began to establish their colony. They named their new home New Jorvik, after the great city in England, symbolizing their connection to the old world and their hope for a prosperous future. The first winter was harsh, but the settlers, drawing on their Norse resilience, survived and even thrived. The growth of Vinland. By 1066, the population of Vinland had grown to 5,000. The colony was no longer a distant outpost but a thriving settlement, with farms, trading posts, and even the beginnings of a fortification to protect against the native Skraelings, with whom relations were tense but manageable. The settlers were no longer just Norse, they had become Vinlanders, a people distinct yet connected to their roots across the sea. The influence of Vinland began to ripple back to Europe. Traders brought tales of the New World, its bounty, and its potential. Canute's vision had come to fruition. His North Sea Empire now had a foothold in the West, a legacy that would shape the future in ways that none could have predicted. Chapter 2. The Flight of the Saxons. The Fall of England. The year 1066 marked a cataclysmic shift in the history of England. The death of King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings and the subsequent Norman conquest sent shockwaves through the land. William the Conqueror, with his iron grip, sought to impose Norman rule across the country, replacing the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy with his own loyalists. For the Saxon nobility, this was more than just the loss of land and title, it was the loss of their way of life, their culture, and their identity. As the Normans tightened their hold, resistance flickered across England. However, by the 1070s it became clear to many that the Saxon way of life was under threat of obliteration. The once proud lords of England faced a stark choice: submit to Norman rule or flee. A significant number chose the latter, seeking refuge far beyond the reach of the Normans. The Great Exodus. In the late 1070s, the first waves of Saxon refugees began to make their way to the North Sea ports, where rumors of a new land, untouched by Norman influence, beckoned. Tales of Vinland, carried back by Norse traders, had reached their ears, a land of opportunity where Saxons could rebuild and preserve their heritage. Leading this exodus were Harold Godwinson's sons, Harold and Alfred, known to the Norse as Ulf. The brothers, having fled after their father's defeat, had spent years wandering in exile, gathering followers and dreaming of reclaiming their birthright. They saw in Vinland not just a refuge, but a chance to establish a new Saxon kingdom, free from Norman domination. In 1080, Harold and Ulf gathered a fleet of ships, filled with Saxon nobles, their families, and loyal warriors. The journey across the Atlantic was perilous, but the Saxons were driven by desperation and hope. They sailed with the blessing of Eric Thorfinnsson, the Norse leader of New Jorvik, who welcomed their arrival as a boon to the growing colony. Founding of Nova Anglia. Upon reaching Vinland, the Saxons initially settled in the outskirts of New Jorvik. However, it was clear that they needed a land of their own, a place where they could forge a new identity while preserving their old one. In the early 1080s, Harold and Ulf led a large group of Saxons southward, seeking fertile land along the coast to establish their new home. They found it in a region that reminded them of the England they had left behind, rolling hills, dense forests, and rivers teeming with fish. Here, they founded the settlement of Nova Anglia, New England, a name that would come to symbolize the rebirth of Saxon culture in the New World. The settlement grew quickly as more Saxons fled the Norman yoke, joining their countrymen in this new land. The early years were hard. The Saxons had to contend with harsh winters, unfamiliar terrain, and occasional skirmishes with the native Skraelings. But with the help of their Norse neighbors and their own indomitable spirit, they persevered. They built towns, cultivated the land, and established trade with New Jorvik and beyond. Over time, the Saxons of Nova Anglia began to refer to themselves as Anglicans, a people distinct yet connected to their English roots. The rise of the Anglicans. By the end of the 1080s, Nova Anglia had become a thriving colony, with its own governance and a growing population. The Saxons, under the leadership of Harold and Ulf, maintained a semblance of their old nobility, with Harold assuming the title of Ealdorman and Ulf serving as his trusted lieutenant. They sought to recreate the structures of Saxon England, but with adaptations suited to their new environment. The Anglicans quickly became known for their resilience and independence. While they maintained friendly relations with the Norse settlers, they were determined to carve out their own destiny in Vinland. The Saxon language, customs, and law were preserved and adapted to the New World, creating a unique blend of old and new. The establishment of Nova Anglia marked a significant moment in the history of Vinland. What had begun as a Norse outpost was now home to a diverse population, including the Norse Vinlanders and the Anglican Saxons. The two communities, while distinct, shared common interests and gradually began to influence one another, leading to a rich cultural tapestry that would shape the future of the New World. The dream of Harold Godwinson lived on in Nova Anglia, where the descendants of his people thrived far from the Norman boot. The Anglicans would go on to play a crucial role in the development of Vinland, their influence reaching far beyond their own borders as they became one of the dominant cultures of the region. Chapter 3. The Birth of a Kingdom. The Tragic Death of Earl Ulf. The year 1097 marked a dark chapter in the history of the Anglican settlers in Nova Anglia. Earl Ulf, the younger brother of Harold and a beloved leader among the Anglicans, was killed in a fierce battle with the Patuxet tribe. The loss of Ulf was a devastating blow to the Anglican community, not only because of his leadership but also because of the deep personal connection he had with his people. Ulf had been a symbol of hope and resilience, embodying the spirit of the Saxon exiles who had fled Norman England to carve out a new life in Vinland. The manner of Ulf's death quickly became the subject of dark rumors. It was whispered that Ulf had been captured alive and subjected to horrific torture by the Patuxet before being brutally killed. Although these rumors were later proven to be false, they fueled a burning desire for vengeance among the Anglicans. What was true, however, was that the Patuxet had desecrated Ulf's body. This act of sacrilege was an affront to the deeply religious and honor-bound Anglicans, and it ignited a fire of retribution that would soon consume the entire region. The War of Vengeance. In the wake of his brother's death, Harold took up the mantle of leadership with a single-minded determination to avenge Ulf and secure the safety of his people. Over the next 3 years, Harold led the Anglicans in a brutal campaign against the Patuxet. This was not merely a war of conquest, but a war of extermination. The Anglicans, driven by their grief and anger, sought to wipe the Patuxet from the face of the earth. Harold found willing allies in the Massachusetts and Wampanoag tribes, who were eager to weaken a rival and expand their own influence in the region. These alliances, though pragmatic and often tenuous, provided Harold with the additional warriors and resources he needed to carry out his campaign. The Anglicans, armed with their superior weapons and tactics, systematically destroyed Patuxet villages, driving the survivors into the wilderness or killing them outright. The Patuxet, like many of the native tribes in Nova Anglia, had already been decimated by the novel diseases brought by the European settlers. These diseases, to which the native populations had no immunity, had swept through their communities like wildfire, reducing their numbers and weakening their ability to resist. This demographic advantage allowed the Anglicans to dominate the battlefield despite the fierce resistance of the Patuxet. By the year 1100s, the Patuxet were no more. Their lands had been claimed by the Anglicans, and their memory lingered only in the stories told by the surviving tribes. The war had secured Harold's place as the undisputed leader of the Anglicans and set the stage for the next chapter in the history of Nova Anglia, the coronation of King Harold I. With the Patuxet vanquished and their lands secured, the Anglicans turned their attention to the future. It was clear to all that Harold had proven himself as a leader worthy of more than just the title of ealdorman. In 1100s, the Witan, a council of nobles, warriors, and clergy, gathered in Winchester, the site of what would later be known as Plymouth, to formally elect Harold as the first king of Nova Anglia. The coronation was a momentous event, not only for the Anglicans but for all of Vinland. Father Alfred, who had risen to prominence as the spiritual leader of the Anglican community, crowned and blessed Harold as king. This act symbolized the close relationship between the newly established Anglican Church and the monarchy, a bond that would shape the kingdom's development for generations to come. In his first act as king, Harold declared the independence of Nova Anglia from any external power, including Vinland, Denmark, or any other European authority. Nova Anglia would be a sovereign kingdom, ruled by its own laws and guided by its own values. However, Harold also recognized the importance of maintaining strong ties with Vinland, and he worked to forge a relationship of mutual respect and cooperation with the neighboring Norse kingdoms. By the late 12th century, as the kingdom continued to grow in both population and influence, the Anglicans began to refer to their country simply as Anglia. The name Nova Anglia, while still the official designation of the kingdom, became reserved for formal occasions and legal documents. This shift in terminology reflected the Anglicans' deepening sense of identity and permanence in their new homeland, as they increasingly saw themselves not as settlers in a distant land, but as the rightful inhabitants of a unified and thriving nation. The expansion of Nova Anglia. Under King Harold's rule, Nova Anglia entered a period of rapid expansion. The kingdom's population grew as more Saxon exiles and other settlers arrived from Europe, drawn by the promise of land and freedom. The Anglicans, with their preference for coastal and riverine settlements, established new towns and villages along the shores of Nova Anglia, using their longships to maintain communication and trade between the scattered communities. Harold's reign was marked by constant warfare, as the tribes of Nova Anglia, though weakened by disease and earlier defeats, remained a threat to the growing kingdom. The Massachusetts, Nauset, and Narragansett tribes, seeing the rise of Nova Anglia as a direct challenge to their own existence, formed a coalition to resist further encroachment. However, Harold's alliances with the Wampanoag and Mohegan tribes gave him the strength needed to confront this new threat. Each year, Harold led his armies into battle, determined to secure the borders of his kingdom and protect his people from the fierce and warlike tribes. The Anglicans, with their mastery of longship warfare, were able to project power across a wide area, launching raids and establishing fortified outposts in strategic locations. This strategy allowed them to control the most fertile and accessible lands, ensuring the kingdom's prosperity and security. In 1107, the Anglicans began the settlement of an island that would come to be known as Long Island. Its strategic location made it a valuable asset, allowing the Anglicans to control the waters surrounding Nova Anglia and protect their growing empire from external threats. The settlement of Long Island was a key part of Harold's strategy to expand the kingdom's influence along the eastern seaboard, laying the groundwork for future growth. The legacy of King Harold I. King Harold I ruled Nova Anglia until his death in 1126, his reign characterized by both conquest and consolidation. By the time of his death, Nova Anglia had expanded across much of the coastal regions, its influence extending into the lands of the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nauset, and Narragansett tribes. The kingdom had become a beacon of hope for those seeking refuge from the turmoil of Europe, a place where Saxon culture and the Anglican faith could thrive. Harold was remembered as an ideal king, a warrior, a statesman, and a devout Christian. He was celebrated not only for his military victories, but also for his wisdom in governance and his commitment to the welfare of his people. Under his rule, the foundations of the Anglican Church were laid, with Father Alfred becoming the first archbishop and guiding the spiritual life of the kingdom. The death of King Harold I marked the end of an era, but his legacy endured. He was remembered as the father of the Anglicans, the founder of a kingdom that would continue to grow and prosper in the New World. The kingdom of Nova Anglia, born out of the ashes of Saxon England, had become a force to be reckoned with, a testament to the resilience and determination of its people. The kingdom of Nova Anglia, under the leadership of Harold I and his successors, would continue to expand its influence along the eastern seaboard. The bonds of cooperation between the small Norse and Anglican kingdoms would lay the foundation for a network of alliances that would eventually stretch from Newfoundland to the South Atlantic coast of the continent. As the years passed, the Anglicans would become a distinct people, united by their shared history, culture, and faith. The kingdom Harold founded would endure, its people forging a new identity in the New World, rooted in their Saxon heritage, but adapted to the challenges and opportunities of a vast and untamed land. Chapter 4: Father Alfred and the Founding of the Anglican Church. The making of a warrior priest. If any man other than Long Harold could lay claim to the title Father of the Anglicans, it was Father Alfred, the first Archbishop of the Anglican Church and its most influential founder. But Alfred was more than just a churchman. He was also a warrior, poet, reformer, and the father of 15 children. His life was one of profound complexity, shaped by tragedy, faith, and an unwavering resolve to build a new society grounded in a distinct interpretation of Christianity. Born in England around 1051 or 1052, Alfred was destined for the priesthood from a young age. His early years were spent in the study of theology, but his education was abruptly cut short in 1066, when England was plunged into chaos. Alfred joined King Harold Godwinson's army on its march to Stamford Bridge, where he assisted the priests in tending to the wounded. This experience of war, however, was only the beginning. Alfred was present at the Battle of Hastings, a pivotal event that would forever change the course of English history. Despite having little formal training in arms, Alfred's powerful 6-foot frame made him a formidable presence on the battlefield, where he fought alongside the Saxon militia from his hometown. After the disastrous defeat at Hastings, Alfred returned to his village, only to find it destroyed by Norman forces. His family had been killed, and when he sought a priest to bury them, he was turned away by a Norman cleric who declared that, because the Pope had excommunicated Harold Godwinson. All those who supported him were similarly condemned. This rejection was a turning point for Alfred, instilling in him a lifelong hatred of both the Normans and the Pope. His grief and rage fueled his resolve to fight against the new order imposed on England. Alfred's journey and theological awakening. After wandering through the devastated countryside, Alfred eventually found his way to York, where he entered the service of a Saxon bishop. It was here that he began to shape his theological views, heavily influenced by his personal experiences of loss and betrayal. The bishop, recognizing Alfred's potential, sent him on a pilgrimage to Rome, hoping that the experience would temper his disdain for the papacy. But the pilgrimage had the opposite effect. As Alfred traveled through Europe, visiting cities like Paris and finally reaching Rome, he became even more convinced that the Roman Church had strayed from the true teachings of Christ and the apostles. He viewed the grandeur of Rome not as a testament to divine favor, but as evidence of the Church's corruption and deviation from the simple, profound faith of the early Christians. Upon his return to England, Alfred took up a position as a parish priest, but his life soon changed once again when he encountered Harold, the son of the late King Harold Godwinson. The two men quickly formed a bond, united by their shared Saxon heritage and their mutual disdain for the Norman rulers. When Harold began planning an expedition to Vinland to establish a new Saxon settlement, Alfred readily agreed to join him. The journey to Vinland and the founding of the Anglican Church. Alfred was not just a spiritual leader, he was also a man of action. Recognizing the challenges that awaited them in Vinland, he recruited other priests to join the expedition and was appointed the senior prelate by Harold. The journey to Vinland was arduous, but it was also a time of great anticipation. The settlers, including Alfred, saw this new land as a place where they could build a society free from the oppression they had faced in England. In Vinland, Alfred's influence grew rapidly. Understanding the scarcity of manpower in the new settlement, Alfred proclaimed that priests should participate in war as combatants if necessary, and should marry and have children to help populate the growing colony. This decree, radical at the time, became one of the defining characteristics of the Anglican Church, differentiating it from the Roman Church, which mandated clerical celibacy. Alfred also took a revolutionary step by ordering the Bible to be translated into the common language. The translation, completed in 1119, was a monumental achievement. Written in Old English with Norse influences, this handwritten Bible was distributed to every church in the kingdom. It became a cornerstone of Anglican identity, fostering a common language and deepening the settlers' faith during the hardships they faced. But perhaps one of Alfred's most profound teachings was the belief that the Anglicans, like the children of Israel, were destined by God for a time of wandering and hardship. He preached that this period of struggle was part of a divine plan, a necessary preparation for the great task that lay ahead. Alfred taught that God had given the Anglicans a unique opportunity to build a new Jerusalem in the New World, a place from which the knowledge of God would one day cover the earth, as the waters cover the sea. This belief in their holy calling provided both comfort and motivation for the Anglicans, instilling in them a sense of purpose and destiny that would drive their efforts for centuries to come. The vision of a new Jerusalem in the New World became a central theme in Anglican thought, shaping their identity and mission as they expanded across the continent. Poet, warrior, reformer, Alfred was not only a spiritual leader, but also a man of letters and arms. During the wars against the Patuxet, Alfred wrote The Warrior Priest, a poem that captured the inner turmoil of a man of God who must also take up arms. This work, the first significant piece of non-ecclesiastical literature in Anglican history, is still studied today for its insight into the mind and heart of the warrior priest. The poem encapsulates the struggles of faith and duty, of violence and mercy, that defined the lives of the early Anglicans. With the establishment of the Kingdom of Nova Anglia, Alfred was tasked with organizing the church. His vision for the Anglican Church was rooted in the belief that it should be both independent and grounded in the Scriptures. In the Anglican Confession and Articles of Faith and Practice, documents drafted by Alfred and signed by all the kingdom's priests, the Church rejected papal infallibility and proclaimed that the Scriptures alone were sufficient for living a godly life. This confession, considered by historians as proto-Protestant, set the Anglican Church on a path distinct from Rome. While the Roman Church would later declare this confession heretical, it took no immediate steps to suppress the far-flung kingdom. Alfred also championed a code of conduct for warfare, rooted in the teachings of St. Augustine. He preached the concept of just war, arguing that while wars of annihilation could be justified against pagan tribes, the ultimate goal should be conversion, not extermination. Alfred's insistence on minimizing cruelty in war initially met with resistance from the more warlike Anglicans. But his own example, a man over 50 years old still fighting alongside his flock, won over even the most hardened warriors. His ability to nurse captives and care for the wounded, both friend and foe, left a lasting impression on the people. Alfred's influence extended beyond the battlefield. He used his position as archbishop to encourage Anglican women to withhold their favors from men who practiced unnecessary cruelty, leveraging social pressure to enforce his moral teachings. His reforms gradually transformed the culture of the Anglican people, instilling a sense of duty and righteousness in their conduct both in war and in peace. The enduring legacy of Father Alfred. By the time of Alfred's death in 1136, the Anglican Church was firmly established as a central institution in Nova Anglia. His shorter catechism, widely circulated throughout the kingdom, became a key tool in educating the populace and fostering literacy. Alfred's dream of a society where all could read the Word of God was becoming a reality, with literacy rates rising rapidly across the kingdom. Alfred's legacy was carried on in his many children from his two marriages, first to Edith of York, died 1114, and Mary of Winchester, a former nun. Today, the Children of Alfred Society has tens of thousand numbers and estimates that are over 200,000 descendants of Alfred. Father Alfred left behind a legacy that would shape the Anglican Church for centuries. He was remembered not only as a founder of the Church, but as a warrior, poet, and reformer who helped forge a new identity for the Anglican people. His teachings on war, his emphasis on Scripture, and his rejection of papal authority set the foundation for a church that was uniquely adapted to the challenges of life in the New World. Epilogue. Alfred's death marked the end of an era, but his influence lived on in the lives of the Anglican people. The church he built became the spiritual heart of Nova Anglia, guiding its people through the trials and triumphs that lay ahead. His Bible, his confession, and his catechism would be read and revered for generations, ensuring that his vision for a godly society remained at the core of Anglican identity. The story of Father Alfred is the story of a man who, through faith and determination, helped transform a group of exiles into a thriving, unified nation. His legacy as the father of the Anglican Church endures, a testament to the power of belief and the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Chapter 5, The Growth of the Anglican Kingdom and the First Conflicts with the Norse Settlements. The expansion of Nova Anglia. By the early 12th century, the Kingdom of Nova Anglia had firmly established itself along the eastern seaboard of what would later be known as North America. Under the leadership of King Harold I, the Anglicans had expanded their territory significantly, securing key coastal and riverine areas that provided both strategic and economic advantages. The settlements, once small and vulnerable, had grown into thriving communities, supported by trade, agriculture, and a shared sense of purpose. Harold's vision for Nova Anglia was ambitious. He sought not only to secure the kingdom's borders, but to expand its influence further inland and along the coast. This expansion, however, brought the Anglicans into closer contact, and eventually conflict, with the Norse settlers who had established their own communities in Vinland and surrounding areas. The Norse, who had first arrived in the New World decades earlier, had initially welcomed the Saxon exiles as fellow Europeans and potential allies. However, as the Anglican kingdom grew in strength and numbers, the relationship between the two groups began to change. What had once been a cooperative relationship, founded on mutual benefit, started to show signs of strain. The roots of tension. Several factors contributed to the growing tensions between the Anglicans and the Norse. First and foremost was the competition for land. As Nova Anglia expanded, it began to encroach on territories traditionally claimed by the Norse. The fertile land along the coast, which the Anglicans favored for its accessibility and agricultural potential, was also highly prized by the Norse settlers. Disputes over land ownership and usage became increasingly common, leading to friction between the two groups. Another source of tension was cultural and religious differences. While the Anglicans and the Norse shared some common ground, both being of European origin and having similar warrior traditions, their religious beliefs and practices were diverging. The Norse, who followed a blend of Christianity and lingering pagan traditions, viewed the increasingly distinct Anglican Church with suspicion. Father Alfred's theological reforms, particularly his rejection of papal authority and his emphasis on an independent, scripture-based faith, further deepened the divide. The Norse, still loosely connected to the Christian traditions of Scandinavia, saw the Anglican Church as a potential threat to their own religious practices and way of life. Trade, too, became a point of contention. The growing population of Nova Anglia increased demand for resources, leading the Anglicans to expand their trading networks. This expansion sometimes put them in direct competition with the Norse, who had long dominated trade in the region. The Norse, who relied heavily on trade with Europe and other Norse colonies, began to see the Anglicans as rivals rather than partners. The first conflicts. The first significant conflict between the Anglicans and the Norse occurred in 1112, over a disputed territory near the mouth of a large river that both groups claimed as their own. The river, rich in fish and providing access to the interior, was a valuable resource for both communities. Tensions escalated when an Anglican fishing party was attacked by Norse warriors, who claimed that the Anglicans had trespassed on their land. King Harold I, unwilling to let the incident go unanswered, led a retaliatory raid against the Norse settlement. The attack, while not large in scale, sent a clear message that Nova Anglia would defend its interests with force if necessary. The Norse responded in kind, leading to a series of skirmishes and raids over the next few years. These conflicts, though relatively small, marked the beginning of a more adversarial relationship between the two groups. The situation was further complicated by the alliances that both the Anglicans and the Norse had formed with various native tribes. The Anglicans had established strong ties with the Wampanoag and Mohegan tribes, while the Norse had their own allies among the native populations. These alliances meant that any conflict between the Anglicans and Norse could potentially draw in their respective native allies, turning local disputes into larger regional conflicts. Harold's pursuit of peace. Recognizing the potential for a protracted conflict that could destabilize the entire region, King Harold I took significant steps to secure a lasting peace with the Norse and other European settlers. He understood that while Nova Anglia was growing stronger, it could not afford to be in a constant state of war, especially as the kingdom was still in its formative years. In the aftermath of the 1112 conflict, Harold initiated a series of diplomatic missions aimed at building trust and cooperation between Nova Anglia and its neighbors. He personally met with Norse leaders, seeking to ease tensions and negotiate boundaries that both sides could agree upon. Through these efforts, Harold was able to establish a more defined border along the disputed river, reducing the likelihood of future skirmishes. Harold also focused on fostering economic ties with the Norse. By promoting trade between Nova Anglia and the Norse settlements, he hoped to create mutual dependencies that would make conflict less desirable. The trade agreements he negotiated allowed for the exchange of goods such as timber, furs, and agricultural products, benefiting both sides and helping to stabilize the region. Furthermore, Harold worked to strengthen the alliances Nova Anglia had with native tribes, ensuring that they remained loyal to the Anglican cause. He understood that these alliances were crucial not only for defense, but also for maintaining peace with the Norse, who had their own native allies. Harold also forged alliances by marriage of his children with the leading families of Vinland and Iceland. The impact of peace. Harold's efforts to secure peace had a profound impact on the development of Nova Anglia. The reduced threat of conflict allowed the kingdom to focus on internal growth and consolidation. Settlements that had been on the frontier of conflict were now able to expand and prosper, with less fear of raids or territorial disputes. The peace also allowed Harold to continue his broader vision for Nova Anglia as a leading power in the New World. With secure borders and stable relations with its neighbors, Nova Anglia could pursue further expansion, not through conquest, but through diplomacy and trade. The kingdom's economy flourished as a result, with trade routes extending deeper in the continent and across the Atlantic. Harold's diplomatic success also reinforced his authority within Nova Anglia. His ability to secure peace without compromising the kingdom's interests earned him the respect of both his people and his peers. The stability he achieved set the stage for a period of prosperity that would last well beyond his reign. The legacy of Harold's diplomacy. King Harold I's pursuit of peace with the Norse and other European settlers became a defining feature of his reign. His efforts to avoid unnecessary conflict while securing the kingdom's interests laid the foundation for a lasting peace in the region. This peace allowed Nova Anglia to grow and thrive, helping to establish it as a major power in the New World. Harold's diplomacy also set a precedent for future rulers of Nova Anglia. His approach to governance, which balanced strength with negotiation, became a model for how the kingdom would interact with both European and native powers in the centuries to come. The alliances and trade networks he built continued to benefit Nova Anglia long after his death. In the years that followed, the peace Harold secured with the Norse would face challenges, but the groundwork he laid ensured that conflicts could be managed and resolved without descending into full-scale war. His legacy as a warrior king who also valued peace and diplomacy became an integral part of the Anglican identity, influencing how Nova Anglia would navigate the complex dynamics of the New World. The conflicts with the Norse settlements in the early 12th century and the subsequent pursuit of peace by King Harold I were pivotal moments in the history of Nova Anglia. These events not only shaped the kingdom's early development but also established the principles of diplomacy and cooperation that would guide its future interactions with other powers. As Nova Anglia continued to grow and expand, the lessons learned during this period of the importance of both strength and diplomacy remained central to its identity. The kingdom, forged in conflict but sustained by peace, would go on to play a key role in the unfolding history of the New World, driven by a sense of purpose and destiny that had been instilled by its early leaders. Chapter 6. The Rise of the Anglican Church and its Influence on Society. The Consolidation of the Anglican Faith. In the decades following the establishment of Nova Anglia, the Anglican Church rapidly became the heart of the kingdom's identity and social order. Father Alfred, the first archbishop, had laid the foundation with his theological reforms, the translation of the Bible into the common language, and his insistence on a faith rooted in Scripture rather than papal authority. These early efforts set the stage for the Anglican Church to grow not just as a religious institution, but as a cultural and political force that would shape every aspect of life in Nova Anglia. The rise of the Anglican Church was marked by its ability to unify the diverse population of the kingdom under a common spiritual and moral framework. As settlers continued to arrive from Europe bringing with them different traditions and beliefs, the Church played a crucial role in integrating these newcomers into the Anglican way of life. The Church's teachings provided a sense of stability and continuity, helping to forge a shared identity among the people of Nova Anglia. The spread of literacy and education. One of the most significant contributions of the Anglican Church was its commitment to spreading literacy and education throughout the kingdom. Father Alfred's translation of the Bible into the common language was not just a religious act, but a cultural revolution. For the first time, the Scriptures were accessible to ordinary people who could read and interpret the Word of God for themselves. However, the process of hand-copying Bibles was both time-consuming and expensive. The cost of producing each Bible was prohibitive, particularly for the lower classes, who could not afford such luxuries. Recognizing the importance of making the Scriptures available to all, the monarchy and the Church took on the responsibility of funding the production of Bibles. King Harold I and Father Alfred, understanding the critical role that Scripture would play in unifying and educating the kingdom, allocated royal and church funds to cover the cost of producing Bibles. To supplement these efforts, donations were also collected from the nobility, who were encouraged to contribute to the spiritual welfare of the kingdom by sponsoring the creation of additional copies. This practice not only ensured that more people had access to the Bible, but also fostered a sense of communal responsibility among the upper classes. The nobles, eager to support the church and curry favor with the monarchy, contributed generously, helping to expand the reach of the Anglican faith. In addition to full Bibles, the church recognized the need for quicker and more accessible means of spreading the gospel, especially among those who were newly literate or had limited access to education. To this end, the church began producing smaller booklets that contained catechisms and shorter passages from the Bible. These booklets, which were far less expensive to produce and easier to distribute, became a vital tool in the church's mission to spread the Anglican faith throughout the kingdom. The catechisms, written in clear and simple language, provided a concise summary of Anglican doctrine and were used extensively in both education and worship. These small books were distributed widely, reaching even the most remote settlements. They played a crucial role in ensuring that the teachings of the Church could be understood and internalized by people of all social classes. The use of these shorter texts allowed the Church to spread the gospel more rapidly, laying the foundation for a literate and religiously unified society. The development of Anglican rituals and practices. As the Anglican Church grew, it began to develop distinct rituals and practices that differentiated it from both the Roman Catholic Church and the Norse Christian traditions. These practices were rooted in the teachings of Father Alfred, who emphasized a return to the simplicity and purity of early Christianity. One of the most important aspects of Anglican worship was its emphasis on the communal reading of Scripture. Services were structured around the reading and interpretation of the Bible, with sermons that encouraged personal reflection and application of the teachings to everyday life. This focus on Scripture, combined with the widespread availability of the translated Bible and the smaller catechisms, created a deeply personal and participatory form of worship. The Church also introduced specific rituals that reflected the unique challenges and circumstances of life in Nova Anglia. For example, the blessing of ships before voyages and the consecration of land for new settlements became important religious ceremonies. These rituals not only reinforced the Church's role in daily life, but also served to sanctify the expansion and development of the kingdom. The Anglican Church's rejection of celibacy for priests and its acceptance of marriage and family life among the clergy were also defining features. This practice helped to further integrate the Church into the fabric of society, as priests were seen not just as spiritual leaders, but as active members of the community, sharing in the same struggles and joys as their congregants. The Church's influence on law and governance. As the Anglican Church grew in power and influence, it began to play a more direct role in the governance of Nova Anglia. The Church's teachings on justice, morality, and social order became the foundation for the kingdom's legal system. Many of the kingdom's laws were derived from biblical principles, particularly those related to property rights, marriage, and criminal justice. The Church also established a system of ecclesiastical courts, which dealt with matters of church discipline, family disputes, and moral conduct. These courts were respected and often preferred by the people of Nova Anglia, who saw them as more just and aligned with their values than secular courts. The Church's influence extended to the kingdom's leadership as well, with King Harold I and his successors often consulting with the archbishop and other church leaders on matters of state. This close relationship between church and state created a unique form of governance in Nova Anglia, where religious and political authority were deeply intertwined. The Church's moral authority helped to maintain social order and cohesion, while its role in governance ensured that the kingdom's laws reflected the values of its people. Challenges and heresies. Despite its rapid growth and influence, the Anglican Church faced significant challenges as it expanded. One of the most pressing issues was the threat of heresy and doctrinal disputes. As the population of Nova Anglia grew and diversified, so too did the range of beliefs and practices within the Church. Some settlers brought with them religious ideas that were at odds with the teachings of Father Alfred and the Anglican Confession of Faith. The Church responded to these challenges by reinforcing its commitment to scriptural authority and the teachings of the early Church. Ecclesiastical courts were often called upon to address cases of heresy, and in some instances, the Church took steps to excommunicate individuals who refused to conform to Anglican doctrine. These actions, while sometimes controversial, were seen as necessary to maintain the purity and unity of the Church. Another challenge was maintaining the Church's independence from outside religious authorities. While Nova Anglia was geographically distant from Europe, the influence of the Roman Catholic Church and other Christian traditions remained a concern. The Anglican Church had to constantly reaffirm its distinct identity and resist attempts to bring it under the control of external powers. The Church as a unifying force. Despite these challenges, the Anglican Church emerged as a unifying force within Nova Anglia. It provided a common spiritual and moral framework that helped to integrate diverse communities and create a sense of shared identity. The Church's teachings on the divine mission of the Anglicans to build a new Jerusalem in the New World and spread the knowledge of God across the earth gave the people of Nova Anglia a sense of purpose and destiny that transcended the hardships of frontier life. The Church's role in education, law, and governance further strengthened its position as the central institution of Nova Anglia. As the kingdom continued to grow and evolve, the Anglican Church remained at the heart of its identity, guiding its people through both the challenges and triumphs of building a new society in the New World. Epilogue. By the time of Father Alfred's death in 1136, the Anglican Church was firmly established as the spiritual and moral foundation of Nova Anglia. The Church's teachings, rituals, and institutions had become deeply ingrained in the lives of the Anglican people, shaping their identity and guiding their actions as they continued to expand and develop their kingdom. The rise of the Anglican Church was not just a religious movement, but a cultural and political revolution that transformed Nova Anglia into a unified and cohesive society. As the kingdom looked to the future, the church would continue to play a central role in its growth and success, ensuring that the vision of a New Jerusalem in the New World would endure for generations to come. Chapter 7, The Voyages South, Anglican Explorers and the Discovery of New Lands. The Spirit of Exploration. As Nova Anglia grew in strength and stability, the adventurous spirit of its people began to manifest in bold new ways. With their mastery of the seas and the successful consolidation of their kingdom along the eastern seaboard, the Anglicans turned their gaze southward, eager to explore and claim new lands. This chapter chronicles the daring voyages of Anglican explorers who, driven by a mix of ambition, curiosity, and the desire to spread their faith, ventured into the uncharted waters to the south, discovering the Chesapeake Bay, the Florida Peninsula, and the Caribbean islands. These voyages were not just about expanding the kingdom's territory, they were also about fulfilling the religious mission instilled by Father Alfred. The belief that the Anglicans were destined to build a new Jerusalem in the New World and spread the knowledge of God across the earth. The discovery of Chesapeake Bay. The first major voyage southward was led by Captain Ethelric of Winchester in 1120. Ethelric, a seasoned sailor and devout Anglican, was chosen by King Harold I to lead an expedition to explore the southern coasts beyond the boundaries of Nova Anglia. His mission was to find new lands suitable for settlement and to establish new trade routes that could benefit the growing kingdom. Sailing along the Atlantic coast, Ethelric and his crew navigated treacherous waters, enduring storms and strong currents. After weeks at sea, they finally entered a vast estuary. The bay, with its calm waters and abundant resources, immediately struck Ethelric as an ideal location for settlement. The surrounding lands were fertile, with rich forests and numerous rivers flowing into the bay, offering plentiful opportunities for agriculture, fishing, and trade. Ethelric and his crew made contact with the native tribes inhabiting the region, who were initially wary but curious about these newcomers. Through careful diplomacy and the exchange of gifts, Ethelric managed to establish friendly relations with the local tribes, laying the groundwork for future settlements in the region. He named the bay St. George's Bay in honor of the patron saint of England, and after spending several months charting the area and gathering resources, he returned to Nova Anglia to report his findings. The northern end of St. George's Bay, which was originally explored and named by Captain Ethelric of Winchester, would later be known as Chesapeake Bay. By the late 1100s, as more settlements began to spring up in this area, the name Chesapeake Bay became more commonly used, reflecting the region's growing importance in the expanding Anglican kingdom. The discovery was hailed as a significant achievement in Nova Anglia. Plans were quickly made to establish settlements in the region, and over the following years, Anglican settlers began to migrate south, founding new towns along the shores of the bay. The bay's strategic location made it a key asset for Nova Anglia, offering access to the interior and serving as a hub for trade and exploration. The Florida Peninsula and the founding of Peterborough. Encouraged by Ethelric's success, the Anglican monarchy and church sponsored further expeditions to explore the lands beyond the Chesapeake Bay. In 1125, Oswald Godwinson, the younger son of King Harold I, was commissioned to lead an expedition to explore the southernmost reaches of the continent. Oswald's journey took him and his crew farther south than any Anglican had ever ventured. After weeks of navigating along the coast, they reached a land of warm climate, vast wetlands, and dense forests, what is now known as the Florida Peninsula. The peninsula's unique landscape, with its maze of waterways and lush vegetation, presented both challenges and opportunities for the explorers. Despite the difficulties posed by the swampy terrain and the intense heat, Oswald and his men pressed on, mapping the coastline and searching for suitable sites for future settlements. They also encountered several native tribes, who were initially hostile but gradually became more receptive as Oswald's men demonstrated their peaceful intentions. Recognizing the potential of the peninsula, Oswald decided to establish a new settlement as a foothold in this strategically important region. He named the settlement Peterborough, after St. Peter, reflecting both his personal devotion and the Anglican tradition of honoring Christian saints. Peterborough quickly became the center of Anglican activity in the Florida Peninsula, attracting settlers and traders who were eager to exploit the region's rich natural resources. The discovery of the Florida Peninsula and the founding of Peterborough were seen as major triumphs. Oswald described the land as a gateway to the southern seas, recognizing its potential as a strategic location for controlling access to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. The peninsula's warm climate and rich natural resources, including timber and fish, made it an attractive target for settlement and exploitation. Upon his return to Nova Anglia, Oswald was celebrated not only for his discovery, but also for his successful establishment of Peterborough, which quickly grew into a thriving community. The success of this settlement solidified Oswald's reputation as a capable leader and explorer, and his achievements further spurred interest in southern exploration. The Caribbean islands. The final chapter in this wave of southern exploration was the discovery of the Caribbean islands. Inspired by the successes of Ethelric and Oswald, an experienced mariner named Leofwine the Bold set sail in 1130 with a fleet of 3 ships, determined to explore the seas beyond the Florida Peninsula. Leofwine's journey took him into the tropical waters of the Caribbean, where he and his crew encountered a series of islands unlike any they had seen before. The islands, with their white sandy beaches, clear turquoise waters, and abundant flora and fauna, seemed like a paradise on Earth. However, they also presented significant challenges, including treacherous reefs, sudden storms, and unfamiliar diseases. Despite these obstacles, Leofwine and his crew explored several of the larger islands, making contact with the native populations and mapping the archipelago. They were struck by the rich biodiversity of the islands, which offered new and exotic resources such as tropical fruits, spices, and rare woods. The islands also held strategic importance, as they were located along key maritime routes that connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. Leofwine named the islands the Isles of St. Michael after the Archangel, symbolizing their potential as a bastion of Anglican power in the southern seas. The discovery of the Caribbean islands opened up a new frontier for Nova Anglia, offering opportunities for trade, settlement, and the spread of the Anglican faith. The impact of southern exploration. The discoveries of the Chesapeake Bay, the Florida Peninsula, and the Caribbean islands had a profound impact on the future of Nova Anglia. These new lands offered not only opportunities for expansion but also the promise of increased wealth and influence for the kingdom. The Anglican Church, seeing these discoveries as part of their divine mission, supported the establishment of new settlements and the conversion of native populations. The monarchy and church worked together to organize and fund these southern expeditions, recognizing that the success of these ventures would secure Nova Anglia's place as a dominant power in the New World. Settlers were encouraged to move south, and resources were allocated to build forts, establish trade networks, and protect the kingdom's newfound territories. The voyages of Ethelric, Oswald, and Leofwine also served to inspire a new generation of Anglican explorers who would continue to push the boundaries of the known world in the years to come. The spirit of exploration and the pursuit of new lands became central to the identity of Nova Anglia, reinforcing the belief that the kingdom was destined to fulfill a divine mission in the New World. The southern voyages of Anglican explorers in the early 12th century marked a turning point in the history of Nova Anglia. The discoveries of the Chesapeake Bay, the Florida Peninsula, and the Caribbean islands opened up new frontiers for the kingdom, setting the stage for further expansion and the consolidation of Anglican power in the New World. These explorers, driven by a mix of ambition, faith, and the desire for adventure, helped to shape the future of Nova Anglia and establish its presence in regions that would become crucial to its growth and prosperity. Their discoveries not only expanded the kingdom's territory but also strengthened its identity as a people with a divine mission to build a new Jerusalem in the New World. Chapter 9. The Saga of King Harold's War. In the year of our Lord 1129, when the leaves of the great forests of Anglia turned red with the blood of autumn, a shadow fell upon the land. The tribes, fierce and numerous, gathered in secret councils, their hearts burning with ancient grievances. They swore oaths of blood and fire, vowing to drive the Anglicans from their shores, to reclaim the lands that had been theirs since time immemorial. At their head was the mighty chieftain Wamsuta of the Massachusetts, a warrior of fearsome repute, whose name caused mothers to whisper prayers over their children. With him were allied the Nauset and Narragansett, and they sent emissaries to the far-flung tribes, calling all to a great war, a final war, to end the encroachment of the white-skinned invaders. Word of this dark alliance reached King Harold II, son of the great King Harold I, who ruled Anglia from the fortified town of Winchester. Harold II was a young king, newly crowned, but the blood of warriors flowed through his veins. When the tidings of war were brought to him by swift riders, he summoned his thanes and captains, men of iron who had fought in many battles under his father's banner. "We must take up arms," Harold declared before his witan. "The tribes seek to destroy us, but we are the children of Anglia, chosen by God to build a new Jerusalem in this land. Let them come. We shall meet them in battle, and the Lord shall judge who is worthy to dwell in this land." The gathering of allies. And so it was that the word went out across the kingdom, and from every village, from the farms and the fishing towns, the men of Anglia took up their swords, their bows, and their axes. The priests, too, girded themselves for war, for it was their duty to defend the faithful, as had been taught by the warrior priest Alfred in days gone by. King Harold II, with the wisdom of his forebears, sent messengers to the Wampanoag and Mohegan, the tribes who had long been friends to the Anglicans. "Join us in this war," he bade them, for we fight not only for our lives, but for the future of this land we share." The Wampanoag and Mohegan chiefs, honoring the bonds forged in years past, answered the call. Their warriors, skilled in the ways of the forest and the hunt, came forth to stand with the Anglicans against the coming storm. Thus, the armies of Anglia and their allies gathered, a great host of men, both white and brown, united in purpose. They marched under the banner of the cross, and with them rode King Harold II, clad in armor of gleaming steel, his sword at his side, and his heart filled with the fire of righteous wrath. The Battle of Ironwood. The year was 1131, and it was on a cold winter's day that the forces of King Harold II met the tribes in battle. This battle, the first of many in what would be known as King Harold's War, was fought in the dense woods of Ironwood, so named for the ancient trees that grew there, their roots deep in the blood-soaked earth. Wamsuta, the Massachusetts chieftain, had chosen the place well. His warriors knew the forest like the backs of their hands, and they moved through the shadows like wraiths. The Anglicans, though fewer in number, stood shoulder to shoulder with their tribal allies, their hearts steeled by faith and the knowledge that there was no retreat, no surrender. As the sun rose on that fateful day, the air was filled with the sound of war cries and the clash of weapons. The battle was fierce and unforgiving, with neither side willing to give an inch. The warriors of the tribes came forth like a great tide, their painted bodies moving as one, their arrows darkening the sky. But the Anglicans, trained in the ways of war and guided by the hand of God, held their ground. The priests moved among the soldiers, their prayers rising like smoke to heaven. They called upon the Lord to grant them victory, and their voices were joined by the chants of the Wampanoag and Mohegan shamans, who invoked the spirits of the earth and sky to lend their strength to the battle. King Harold II fought at the forefront, his sword flashing in the winter sun. His presence on the battlefield was a beacon of hope to his men and a terror to his foes. He fought with the strength of 10 men, cutting down any who dared to stand against him. Beside him stood his trusted thane, Osric the Red, whose axe cleaved through the ranks of the enemy with grim precision.